My mommy was left to die in the desert, until a stranger with a hat came riding in. The sun was just beginning to rise, spilling golden light over the endless desert, but for Maria, the warmth felt harsh and unforgiving. She held her little boy, Daniel, close to her chest, trying to shield him from the scorching rays. Her lips were dry, and every step she took on the rough, cracked sand made her feet ache. They had been walking for hours, though it felt like days, and the distance ahead seemed impossible. The horizon stretched endlessly, a shimmering mirage that teased her with the promise of safety but offered none. Maria had been traveling with a small group, hoping to reach a distant town where they could start a new life. Things had been difficult for years, work was scarce, bills piled up, and every day brought new challenges. She wanted better for Daniel, a life where he could laugh freely, go to school, and feel safe. She remembered the nights when they had no food, the nights when she held Daniel close as he cried quietly, afraid of the noises outside their small, fragile home. She had dreamed of this journey as a path to hope, but now, under the unrelenting desert sun, hope seemed fragile, almost like a thin thread she might lose at any moment. The journey had started with excitement and cautious optimism. They had packed what little they could carry, some food, water, a few blankets, and the hope that kindness would guide their path. But things began to go wrong almost immediately. The vehicle they had rented broke down on the first day. The engine had made a strange noise, then stopped entirely, leaving them stranded. They tried to fix it, but the sun was merciless, and soon their small supply of water was shrinking dangerously fast. Tension grew among the group, and the warmth of companionship they had started with began to fade into whispers of blame and fear. Maria had watched in disbelief as the others started to leave, one by one, deciding that survival was their own problem. They abandoned her and Daniel, leaving only a few bottles of water that they argued were enough. She tried to call out, pleading with them to stay, but her voice was swallowed by the vastness around them. In that moment, Maria felt the first real sting of fear, sharp and cold. She had never been alone like this, truly alone with her child in a place so vast and unrelenting. The desert seemed to stretch on forever, as if it had been created to swallow people who dared to wander too far from safety. Her small hands shook as she checked Daniel's tiny face. He was only 3 years old, his skin soft and pale, eyes wide and filled with confusion. He did not yet understand why the others had gone, why they were alone, or why the world suddenly seemed so frightening. Maria forced a gentle smile, even though her own heart was pounding with fear. "We're okay, baby," she whispered. "We'll be okay." She tried to keep her voice calm, but inside, worry was a storm she could not control. She knew that every second counted. The sun would rise higher, the sand would burn their feet, and if they didn't find shelter or water soon, survival would become a distant hope. They started walking slowly, Maria carrying Daniel and using a small backpack to hold what little food and water remained. Each step felt heavier than the last. The sand was soft, giving way under their weight, and the wind blew in hot gusts that stung their eyes. She tried to remember the directions she had been given, landmarks that were supposed to guide them, but the desert was endless and almost every hill or dune looked the same. Her mind spun with worry, imagining the worst. She thought of the nights without food, of the little moments of laughter they had shared at home, of the future she had dreamed for Daniel. She could not let it slip away now. As the day wore on, fatigue began to set in. Maria's feet were blistered, her mouth dry, and her arms ached from carrying Daniel. Every so often, she would set him down for a moment, letting him crawl a few steps on his own, but even his small legs grew tired quickly. She had to keep moving because she knew stopping meant danger. She scanned the horizon for signs of life, for any movement that could signal help. A distant rock formation shimmered in the heat like a mirage, and she thought desperately that maybe shelter awaited there. With renewed hope, she trudged forward, one slow step at a time. Even in her exhaustion, Maria tried to make the journey a little less frightening for Daniel. She talked to him softly, telling stories about brave animals and magical lands, hoping to distract him from the harsh reality. She sang quiet songs their grandmother used to sing, her voice trembling but steady enough to calm him. Daniel clung to her, trusting her completely, and in that trust Maria found a small reserve of strength she did not know she had. She could not fail him, not here, not now. As the sun climbed higher, the heat became unbearable. Maria could feel the sweat soaking her clothes, her skin burning and her throat raw. Water was almost gone, and she rationed what little they had left. She thought about drinking less, about hiding it from Daniel so he would not feel fear, but the thought of seeing him suffer from thirst was unbearable. Her mind raced with strategies, ways to survive until help arrived, any plan that could keep them alive. She remembered every story she had heard of people lost in the desert and vowed silently that she would not become one of them. Hours passed slowly, like an endless stretch of time designed to test her courage. The desert seemed to whisper doubts into her ear, telling her that no one would come, that this was the end. Her legs ached, her eyes stung, and her hands were raw from gripping Daniel and her backpack so tightly. She paused for a moment under a small, sparse bush, trying to find shade, and she prayed quietly, not sure who she was speaking to, but desperate for anything that could give them safety. Daniel looked up at her with innocent eyes, sensing her worry but not understanding it fully. Maria stroked his hair gently, whispering, "We're going to make it, I promise." As night approached, the temperature dropped slightly, but the desert remained harsh. Maria gathered what blankets they had and wrapped Daniel close, feeling the chill bite at their bodies. She stayed awake as much as possible, listening for sounds that might indicate help, hoping against hope that someone would appear, someone who could rescue them from this endless place. Her thoughts drifted to memories of home, to friends, to the life she had hoped to build, and she clung to those memories as tightly as she clung to Daniel. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a struggle, but Maria never gave up. Even when despair whispered cruelly in her ears, she pressed on. She was not just fighting for herself, but for Daniel, for the small life that depended entirely on her. She remembered her mother's words spoken long ago, "Strength isn't about never falling, it's about getting up every time you do." And so, she kept moving forward, one small step at a time, through the unrelenting heat, with only the hope that someone somehow would come. By the time the moon rose over the desert, casting silvery light over the sand, Maria and Daniel were exhausted beyond measure. But in the darkness, a tiny flicker of hope glimmered in her heart. She did not know what the next day would bring, whether rescue would come or the desert would claim them. But she would not give up, not yet. She had survived so far, and she would survive until the end. And somewhere just beyond the horizon, an unknown stranger rode toward them, a figure in a hat, a hope she could not yet see. But that hope, unknown and unseen, was already moving closer, ready to change their fate forever. The desert grew hotter as the day progressed, the sun climbing high and beating down on Maria and Daniel with relentless intensity. Maria's throat was dry, and every step felt heavier than the last. Her small backpack, which had once carried hope, now felt like a weight of despair. Water was almost gone, and the few pieces of bread they had were crumbling in her hands. She had rationed carefully, but still, Daniel had barely touched anything, too tired and too thirsty to eat. Maria's mind raced with fear and worry. She knew that every hour mattered. She could feel her own strength fading, but she could not let Daniel see it. He depended on her completely. She remembered the nights before their journey when she had dreamed of a better life for him, of days filled with laughter and safety. But now, as she trudged through the endless sand, those dreams seemed distant, almost impossible. Still, she held on to them tightly, knowing they were the only thing that could keep her moving. As the heat pressed down on them, Maria noticed the signs of danger around her. The desert was alive in ways she had never realized before. Tiny lizards scuttled over the sand, and distant birds circled high in the sky, perhaps searching for water as well. The wind picked up, carrying dust that stung her eyes and filled her nose. She pressed a scarf against Daniel's face to protect him, her own face burning under the sun. Each moment was a battle, against exhaustion, against hunger, against the unyielding desert. Daniel's small hand held hers tightly. His trust in her was complete, and she felt the weight of responsibility more than ever. She whispered stories to him to keep his mind away from fear. She spoke of brave animals, of magical lands where the sun was gentle and food was plentiful. She sang soft songs, her voice trembling but steady, trying to create a world of safety around them even as the real world grew more threatening. Daniel smiled weakly at her words, leaning against her, and in his tiny courage, Maria found a spark of her own. By midday, the desert heat had reached its peak. Maria's lips were cracked, and her skin felt like it was burning from the sun. Her footsteps were slower now, each one a struggle against the sand that shifted beneath her feet. She kept glancing at the horizon, searching for anything that might offer hope, a hill, a rock formation, or even a shadow that promised shade. But all she saw was an endless expanse of sand and sky, unbroken except for the occasional shimmer of heat that made the world seem like it was moving. Maria tried to make every step purposeful. She knew she had to keep moving, even when her body screamed to stop. She encouraged Daniel to take tiny steps, celebrating each one, clapping softly whenever he managed a few more. His laughter was rare now, but when it came, it was like music to her ears, giving her strength she didn't think she had left. She whispered to him constantly, telling him that they were safe, that the desert could not win over them. Every word she spoke was an act of courage, not just for Daniel but for herself. Night approached slowly, and with it came a drop in temperature. The scorching heat was replaced by a biting chill that made Maria shiver. She gathered their small blankets and wrapped Daniel tightly, holding him close to share her body warmth. The desert at night was quiet but still dangerous. Shadows stretched long across the sand and strange sounds drifted in the wind. Maria stayed awake, listening intently, her senses alert. Every rustle, every whisper of movement made her heart race. She thought about her past and the life she had led before this journey. There were moments of happiness, times when she had felt safe and loved. She remembered her parents, her childhood home, and the laughter of friends. Those memories became a shield against despair. She told herself that she could survive this, that she would not give up until Daniel was safe. Each memory was a step forward, a thread holding her fragile hope together. The desert seemed endless, but Maria refused to let herself falter. Hunger gnawed at her stomach and thirst burned relentlessly, but she pushed through the pain. She tried to ration the little water they had left, letting Daniel drink first. He looked up at her with innocent eyes, trusting her completely, and she felt an unbreakable bond of love that gave her courage. Every step she took, every drop of water she shared, was an act of devotion, a promise that she would protect him no matter what. As they continued their slow march, Maria began to notice the signs of her own weakening body. Her legs trembled, and her vision blurred from the sun and exhaustion. She felt lightheaded at times, and her heartbeat seemed to echo in her ears. Panic began to creep in, but she fought it back. She could not afford to panic, not with Daniel depending on her. She took deep breaths, focusing on the rhythm of their steps, reminding herself that survival was possible, that she could endure. Daniel began to grow quiet, his energy fading along with hers. Maria held him close, whispering softly, telling him stories of brave heroes and magical places. She made up little games, asking him to find shapes in the sand or imagine animals walking beside them. It was exhausting to keep his mind active while hers was filled with fear, but she refused to let him feel despair. His small smiles and weak laughter were lifelines in the vast desert, reminders that hope could still exist even in the harshest places. The hours passed slowly, stretching into a long, exhausting night. Maria could see the stars beginning to appear, tiny points of light in a sky that felt infinite. The moon cast a silver glow over the sand, creating shadows that danced in the wind. For a moment the desert seemed beautiful, almost magical, but the beauty was laced with danger. She knew they could not stop for long. Every hour without water, without food, without shelter, increased the risk. She whispered prayers quietly, not sure if anyone could hear, but hoping that someone, somehow, would come to help them. As the night deepened, Maria noticed her own body slowing down. Her steps became shorter, and her hands ached from holding Daniel so tightly. Her mind grew foggy, and fear threatened to overwhelm her. But she forced herself to keep going, focusing only on the small movements, the next step, the next breath. She reminded herself that she was not alone. Daniel was with her, trusting her completely. That trust became her anchor, the reason she refused to give in to despair. The desert stretched on endlessly, a vast and unforgiving world, but Maria refused to stop. She talked to Daniel constantly, keeping their minds occupied, creating a world of safety and warmth even in the cold and harsh night. She held on to memories of home, of laughter, of moments of love, using them as shields against the fear that threatened to consume her. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat was a victory in itself, a testament to her courage and determination. And then, in the distance, a tiny flicker of movement caught Maria's eye. At first, she thought it was a trick of the moonlight or a shadow shifting in the sand. But as she squinted, she realized it was a figure, a person moving steadily toward them, wearing something that looked like a hat. Her heart leapt with cautious hope, a spark of relief breaking through the exhaustion. She did not know who this person was, or if they would help, but the sight of another human being filled her with renewed strength. Maria tightened her hold on Daniel, whispering softly that someone might be coming to help. She could see his small eyes widen in wonder, a hint of curiosity replacing the fear that had dominated his expression for so long. The figure in the distance continued to approach steadily, slowly becoming clearer. Maria's heart pounded with a mix of hope and fear, unsure if this stranger would be a savior or simply a passerby. Despite her exhaustion, Maria lifted her head and moved toward the approaching figure, each step a mixture of hope and anxiety. She whispered prayers of gratitude, silently thanking whatever forces might be watching over them. Daniel clung to her, sensing the change in energy, the small glimmer of possibility that help might finally arrive. In that moment, Maria realized that survival was not just about strength, but also about hope, and even the smallest signs of kindness could change everything. The night stretched on, but with the figure approaching, Maria felt a new determination. She would hold on, keep moving and protect Daniel until she could be sure they were safe. Every step forward was a victory against the harsh desert, against fear, and against despair. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but the promise of help had arrived, carried by a stranger wearing a hat, riding steadily toward them. The first hint of dawn was barely touching the horizon when Maria noticed the figure in the distance growing clearer. The stranger's hat cast a shadow over his face, but he rode steadily, as if he had known all along where they were. Maria's heart raced with a mix of fear and hope. Could he be here to help them, or was he just another traveler passing through this endless desert? She did not know, but the sight of another human being moving steadily toward them was a glimmer of life she had almost forgotten existed. Daniel stirred in her arms, sensing the tension in her movements. "Mama, who is that?" he asked, his small voice wavering but curious. Maria forced a smile, though her lips trembled with exhaustion. "I think someone might be here to help us, baby," she whispered. Her voice was soft but carried a note of cautious optimism, the first real hope she had felt in days. Daniel clung to her tightly, his tiny arms wrapped around her neck, and in that embrace, Maria felt a surge of courage she had thought was gone forever. The stranger came closer. Maria could now see that he was riding a sturdy horse, moving slowly but surely across the shifting sand. His clothes were worn, practical for traveling long distances under the sun, and his hat shaded his face from the harsh light. He did not shout, he did not wave. He simply rode, steady and calm. There was a quiet confidence in his movements, a sense of purpose that made Maria believe he had come to help, that he was not here by accident. Maria lifted Daniel slightly, trying to make herself and her child more visible. She waved her hand weakly, hoping he would notice them sooner. The stranger slowed his pace as he approached, his eyes scanning the ground carefully. When he finally reached them, he dismounted with surprising grace, tying his horse to a nearby rock. He kept his distance at first, not rushing them, giving Maria space to breathe. His calm presence was comforting, and for the first time in days, Maria felt the tension in her body ease just a little. "Hello," he said quietly, his voice steady but kind. Maria blinked, surprised at the gentleness. She had been so focused on survival, on the fear of being alone, that she almost forgot the sound of a reassuring voice. "Are you okay?" he asked, though his eyes immediately scanned Daniel and the small supplies they had left. Maria shook her head, unable to speak at first, her throat dry and parched. We need water," she managed to whisper. The stranger nodded and reached into a small bag he had brought with him. He handed Maria a flask of water, and she let Daniel drink first, his small hands shaking as he held the cup. Maria watched him, relief and gratitude overwhelming her, as the cool water touched his lips. She took a few sips herself, savoring the life-giving liquid, feeling her strength return just slightly. For the first time in days, she felt like survival was not just a distant hope, but a real possibility. "I'm here to help you," the stranger said simply. "The desert can be cruel. You're lucky I found you." Maria wanted to ask him how he knew where they were, but she felt it was not important. Right now, what mattered was that they were not alone. She nodded, tears filling her eyes, and whispered a quiet thank you. Daniel clung to her, watching the stranger with wide eyes, sensing that this person was different, someone who could change their fate. The stranger gestured toward the horse. "I can take you somewhere safe," he said. Maria hesitated for a moment, unsure if it was safe to trust him completely. But the exhaustion, the fear, and the desperate need for survival outweighed her doubts. She nodded slowly. Yes, please," she said. Daniel squealed softly, excited at the thought of riding the horse, though he had no idea how far they would go. Maria helped Daniel climb onto the horse first, holding him securely as the stranger guided them. She climbed up behind them, her arms wrapped tightly around Daniel, feeling the horse's warmth beneath her. The stranger mounted his own horse and began to lead the way. The rhythm of the horse's movement was strange but comforting, each step forward a small victory over the endless desert. Maria felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly, though her body was still weak and aching. As they rode, the stranger did not speak much, but his calm presence was reassuring. Maria began to notice small details, the way he carefully navigated the shifting sand, the way he kept both mother and child balanced, the way he seemed to know exactly where they needed to go. She did not ask questions, sensing that he would guide them safely if she simply trusted him. Daniel laughed softly as the horse moved, the sound like music to Maria's ears. She held him tighter, whispering words of comfort, feeling hope grow inside her heart again. Hours passed as they rode through the desert. The sun climbed higher, and Maria felt her exhaustion returning, but the steady pace of the horse and the stranger's guidance made survival feel achievable. The desert still stretched endlessly, but with someone leading them, It no longer seemed like an impossible prison. She noticed small changes in the landscape, the shapes of distant hills, the shadows cast by rocky outcrops, and realized that each landmark brought them closer to safety. The stranger occasionally offered small smiles, words of encouragement, and reminders to drink water. He shared some food he had packed, simple bread and dried fruit, which Maria divided carefully between herself and Daniel. The nourishment helped restore their energy, and Maria felt a sense of gratitude she could hardly put into words. She wanted to thank him more, to tell him that he had saved their lives, but she could barely speak through the exhaustion and emotion that weighed her down. Night began to fall again, casting long shadows across the sand. The temperature dropped and Maria shivered, wrapping Daniel in the blankets they had brought. The stranger made a small fire, careful to keep it low, providing warmth without drawing attention. He stayed close, vigilant, ensuring they were safe from the cold and from any dangers that might lurk in the desert night. Maria watched him quietly, realizing that this stranger had not only rescued them but had done so with care and patience, never rushing, never judging. As they rested by the fire, Maria reflected on the days of struggle they had endured. She thought about the moments when despair had almost claimed her, the times she had feared she would lose Daniel forever, and the nights she had held him close, whispering promises she feared she could not keep. And yet here they were, alive, safe for the moment, and moving toward a life they had once thought impossible. She felt a deep, quiet gratitude, a feeling that would stay with her long after the desert was behind them. Daniel, exhausted from the ride and the long days of walking, finally drifted to sleep in her arms. Maria held him, rocking gently, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers. She whispered softly to him, promising that they were safe now, that they would see bright days and kind people, that the desert could no longer harm them. The stranger watched silently, his presence steady and reassuring, and Maria realized that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places, that sometimes kindness arrives in the form of a stranger with a hat and a calm, guiding hand. As the night deepened, Maria finally allowed herself a moment of rest. She leaned against the warmth of the horse, feeling the quiet strength of the stranger beside them, and closed her eyes. The desert still loomed large and dangerous beyond the firelight, but for the first time in days, she believed that they could survive. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were not alone, and that made all the difference. The stranger's calm presence, his patient guidance, and his simple act of stopping to help had changed everything. Maria understood, in a quiet, grateful way, that survival was not only about strength and endurance, but also about the kindness of others, about the willingness of someone to act when it mattered most. She knew that Daniel would grow up remembering this moment, and she would never forget it herself. By the time the fire burned low, Maria and Daniel were resting, wrapped in blankets, and the stranger kept watch silently. The stars stretched endlessly above them, a reminder of how vast the world could be, but also of the small moments of hope that could shine even in the darkest places. Maria felt a sense of peace, fragile but real, and knew that the next day would bring them closer to safety, to life beyond the desert, to a future they could finally believe in. The next morning, the desert was still vast, quiet, and endless, but Maria felt a spark of hope burning inside her. The stranger, whose name she still did not know, had offered them guidance through the desert. The rhythm of the horse's hooves against the sand became a steady reminder that they were moving forward, away from danger, toward safety. Maria held Daniel tightly, feeling his small hands clutch hers as he balanced on the horse, and she whispered softly to keep his spirits high. The stranger led them carefully, pointing out landmarks to guide their path. "We need to follow the ridges," he explained quietly, his voice calm but firm. Maria nodded, trying to memorize everything he said. The desert had been unforgiving so far, and she understood that even a small mistake could be dangerous. She trusted the stranger completely, though she remained alert, her eyes scanning the endless expanse around them. The desert was beautiful in its own harsh way, with dunes glimmering in the sunlight and shadows stretching long across the sand, but beauty here was laced with danger. As the hours passed, the sun rose higher and the heat intensified. Maria could feel sweat soaking through her clothes, and her lips were dry once again. Daniel grew tired and fidgety, and she had to soothe him constantly, telling him little stories to distract him from the sun and the sand. The stranger offered them water when he could, always keeping a careful balance to ensure they had enough to survive until the next stop. Maria drank slowly, savoring each sip, grateful beyond words for this kindness from someone she had never met before. They faced small challenges along the way. At one point, the sand shifted beneath the horses' hooves, making them stumble slightly. Maria's heart raced as she clutched Daniel tightly, whispering reassurances to him while keeping herself steady. The stranger guided the horses carefully, steadying them with gentle words and calm movements. "It's okay," he said softly. "We're safe. Just hold on." His voice was soothing, and Maria felt herself relaxing slightly, trusting that they could make it through every obstacle if they stayed careful and patient. As they traveled further, Maria began to notice subtle changes in the landscape. Small patches of rocky ground appeared, offering temporary relief from the sand. Sparse shrubs and cacti dotted the terrain, providing a tiny bit of shade and something to mark their progress. Each landmark gave Maria hope, reminding her that the desert, though vast and dangerous, had signs of life and paths to safety if one knew where to look. She memorized each change, hoping that one day she would be able to lead others through this harsh place as the stranger was leading them now. By midday, the desert had become scorching again. Maria's skin felt raw under the sun, and her arms ached from holding Daniel. She glanced at him, noticing how his small body trembled from fatigue and heat. Her heart ached at the thought of letting him suffer even a moment longer. The stranger noticed too and slowed his pace, offering brief rests and a chance to drink water. Each small pause was a relief, giving them a moment to gather strength for the next stretch. Maria whispered encouragement to Daniel, telling him how brave he was, how strong he was, and how proud she was of him. Despite the danger, Maria found herself learning from the stranger. He moved with a quiet confidence, never rushing, always observing. He knew when to rest, when to move, and how to manage the limited supplies they had. Maria realized that survival in the desert was not just about physical strength. It was about patience, observation, and respect for the environment. She tried to absorb everything he did, hoping that one day she could pass this knowledge on and ensure that no one she cared about would ever be left helpless in such a place. The journey was not easy. At one point, a sudden gust of wind picked up sand, stinging their eyes and making it hard to see. Maria covered Daniel with a cloth, holding him close as the sand swirled around them. The stranger guided the horses with skill, keeping them steady and moving in a way that protected mother and child. Maria's heart pounded with fear, but she also felt gratitude for the stranger's presence. Without him, they would have been lost, exposed to the harsh winds and scorching sun with no hope of protection. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the dunes, Maria noticed the first signs of fatigue returning. Her body ached, her feet and back burning from hours of holding Daniel, and yet she pressed on. She could not stop, not when safety was so close, not when someone had come into their lives to guide them through this impossible place. Daniel leaned against her, tired but alert, trusting completely in her guidance and in the stranger who had appeared at the right moment. Even with the stranger's help, Maria knew they were not yet out of danger. The desert could change quickly, Sandstorms could rise without warning, temperatures could drop sharply, and water could run out. She stayed alert, scanning the horizon for any signs of trouble. Every shadow, every ripple in the sand was carefully examined. She felt the weight of responsibility keenly. Daniel depended on her, and she could not allow fear or exhaustion to cloud her judgment. As night approached, the temperature dropped sharply. Maria wrapped Daniel in blankets and kept him close, feeling the chill bite at their skin. The stranger made a small fire to keep them warm, watching carefully to ensure it stayed low and safe. Maria watched him silently, realizing how much he had done for them. He had saved their lives once already, and now he was guiding them through the desert, keeping them safe with patience and wisdom. She felt a deep gratitude, so profound that it brought tears to her eyes. Around the fire, Maria thought about the days they had endured alone, the long walks under the scorching sun, the nights filled with fear and uncertainty, the endless stretches of sand that seemed to stretch forever. She thought about the moments when she had felt despair, wondering if she would ever see safety again. And now, here she was, moving steadily toward a future she had almost thought impossible. The stranger's presence reminded her that hope could come from unexpected places, that kindness could arrive in the form of a stranger who simply chose to help. Daniel eventually fell asleep in her arms, exhausted but safe for the moment. Maria watched him carefully, whispering softly to keep him calm and warm. She thought about the lessons of these days, the importance of patience, courage, and trust. She knew that these moments would stay with her and Daniel forever, shaping the way they viewed the world, teaching them the power of kindness and the strength of resilience. The night was quiet, but the desert still loomed large around them. Maria felt a sense of vigilance, knowing that even with the stranger's guidance, the journey was not over. The desert could be unforgiving, and one wrong step could change everything. Yet she also felt a sense of relief, a fragile but real peace that came from being guided by someone who cared, someone who had chosen to help them without expectation. As the fire burned low, Maria reflected on the stranger's quiet courage. He had risked his own safety to guide them, had shared water and food, had protected them from the harsh elements, and had never demanded anything in return. His actions reminded her that true heroism could be quiet, humble, and selfless. She held Daniel tightly, whispering a promise that they would make it through, that they would survive, and that they would never forget the stranger who had changed their lives forever. The desert still stretched ahead, vast and dangerous, but for the first time, Maria felt that survival was possible. Each step forward was a victory, each moment of safety a triumph over the harshness of the world. She knew the journey would continue to be difficult, but with the stranger leading them, guiding them through each obstacle, she felt a renewed sense of strength. Daniel, asleep in her arms, was proof that she had endured, that she had survived, and that the bond between mother and child could withstand even the harshest trials. By the time the first light of dawn touched the horizon again, Maria and Daniel were ready to continue. The stranger had planned their path carefully, ensuring that every step brought them closer to safety. Maria felt a deep sense of gratitude and trust, understanding that survival was not only about strength and endurance, but also about the courage of those who chose to help when it mattered most. The desert had tested them, but it had also revealed the power of human kindness, and Maria knew that they would never forget the lessons of this journey. The first light of dawn spread softly over the desert, casting a golden glow on the sand that had tested Maria and Daniel so harshly. The stranger, still wearing his hat, adjusted the reins of his horse and began guiding them steadily toward what he promised would be safety. Maria held Daniel close, feeling his small body warm against hers, and whispered softly to him that the journey was almost over. Though she was exhausted, every step forward brought a sense of relief and hope that she had not felt in days. The desert, which had seemed endless and merciless, now began to show small signs of life. Sparse vegetation appeared along their path, and distant hills offered the promise of shelter. Maria noticed these changes with gratitude, each one a milestone marking their progress. She reminded herself to stay alert, knowing the desert could change suddenly, but she allowed herself a small sense of comfort. For the first time, survival felt not like a fragile hope, but like a real possibility within reach. Daniel, still nestled against her, began to stir, curiosity replacing some of his exhaustion. "Mama, is it safe now?" he asked, his small voice timid but filled with hope. Maria smiled softly, brushing his hair from his face. "Almost, baby," she said. "We're very close to being safe. Just a little longer and we'll be okay." She could feel his trust in her, unshakable even after days of fear, and it gave her strength she didn't know she still had. Holding him, she realized that survival was more than endurance. It was love, courage, and the will to protect someone precious. The stranger rode slightly ahead, keeping a careful watch over the path. Maria studied him silently, trying to understand the quiet determination that had guided them through the desert. He had not spoken much, but his actions had been clear. He was here to help, fully committed to their safety. Maria felt a profound gratitude for his selflessness. Without him, they would have been lost to the harsh elements, wandering endlessly with dwindling strength. She wanted to thank him, to tell him that he had changed their lives, but words seemed inadequate to convey the depth of her gratitude. Hours passed as they continued to move steadily. The desert, though still challenging, seemed less threatening with the stranger's guidance. He led them around steep dunes, over patches of rocky ground, and through areas where the sand shifted dangerously underfoot. Maria followed closely, focusing on each step, each movement, keeping Daniel safe in her arms. She noticed that the stranger adjusted his pace whenever she or Daniel grew tired, offering a brief pause or a sip of water. His patience was remarkable, a quiet strength that inspired Maria to keep going. Finally, in the distance, they saw signs of life, a cluster of small buildings surrounded by patches of greenery. Maria's heart leapt with relief. Could it be a town, a safe place where they could rest, eat, and recover? She felt tears prickle in her eyes, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and gratitude overwhelming her. She whispered to Daniel, pointing toward the distant buildings. "Look, baby, we're almost there. We'll be safe soon." Daniel's eyes widened in wonder, a smile breaking through his tired expression. For the first time in days, they could see the end of the desert, the place where their suffering might finally end. The stranger guided them carefully toward the town, leading the horses through safer paths. As they drew closer, Maria noticed people going about their daily routines, children playing, families tending small gardens, vendors arranging their goods. The sight was surreal after days of emptiness and danger. Maria felt her heart swell with hope, imagining a future where Daniel could grow up surrounded by care and kindness, where she could finally rest and rebuild their lives. When they reached the edge of the town, the stranger dismounted first, helping Maria and Daniel off the horse. Maria felt unsteady on her legs, weak from exhaustion, and the stranger's steady hand was a lifeline. Daniel tumbled lightly onto the ground, then looked up at Maria, smiling despite the long days of struggle. "We're safe, Mama," he exclaimed softly. Maria hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. The relief was overwhelming, the knowledge that they had survived a journey that had once seemed impossible washing over her like a gentle tide. The stranger led them to a small inn on the edge of the town. The innkeeper, noticing their state, offered them a room and a warm meal without hesitation. Maria watched as Daniel took small bites, his appetite returning now that he felt safe. She herself ate slowly, savoring each mouthful of food and water, feeling nourishment seep back into her body. The comfort of warmth, food, and shelter was almost unreal after the harsh days in the desert. She glanced at the stranger, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know how we could have made it without you." The stranger smiled quietly, tipping his hat. "You both were brave," he said simply. "I just guided the way." Maria felt a deep respect and admiration for him. His humility and selflessness had been the difference between life and death, yet he had asked for nothing in return. She realized that acts of kindness, no matter how small or quiet, could change lives forever. That night, as Maria watched Daniel sleep peacefully, she reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The days in the desert had been terrifying, filled with fear, hunger, and exhaustion, but they had also revealed the strength of her own heart, the depth of a mother's love, and the power of hope. She thought of the stranger who had appeared when all seemed lost, guiding them to safety with patience and courage. His presence had transformed despair into survival, fear into hope. The next morning, Maria woke to a bright sun and the sounds of life around the inn. Children laughed in the streets and vendors called out cheerfully, their voices full of energy and warmth. Maria stepped outside with Daniel, breathing in the fresh air, feeling the sunlight on her face without the fear of it burning her skin. She looked at her child, watching him run briefly on the soft ground, laughing with delight. The sight filled her with joy, a sense of peace she had almost thought impossible in the desert. Maria wanted to find the stranger to thank him properly, but he was already preparing to leave. She caught sight of him at the edge of town, adjusting his horse and tipping his hat. "Wait," she called softly, her voice filled with emotion. He turned and she ran toward him, Daniel following her small steps. "Please, thank you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You saved our lives. I will never forget what you did." The stranger smiled quietly, humility evident in his eyes. "You saved yourselves too," he said gently. "I just helped along the way. Keep your courage and take care of each other. That's what matters most." Maria nodded, understanding the truth in his words. The stranger had been the guide, the helper, but it was her love and determination that had kept them moving, that had kept Daniel alive. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that this experience had changed her forever. As the stranger rode away, Maria watched silently, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. She knew that he would continue his path, helping others in need, a quiet hero in a vast and sometimes cruel world. She hugged Daniel tightly, feeling the bond between them strengthened by everything they had endured. The desert, which had once seemed endless and merciless, was now behind them. Ahead lay a future filled with possibility, safety, and hope. In the weeks that followed, Maria and Daniel began to rebuild their lives. They found a small home in the town, where neighbors welcomed them warmly, offering food, help, and friendship. Daniel began to play freely again, his laughter filling the small spaces of their new life, and Maria found a sense of peace she had not known in years. She thought often of the desert and of the stranger who had appeared when all seemed lost. His kindness had changed their lives forever, a reminder that hope could come from unexpected places, and that courage and compassion could light the darkest paths. Maria knew that she would tell Daniel the story of their journey many times, not to frighten him, but to teach him lessons of hope, bravery, and gratitude. She wanted him to understand the power of kindness, the importance of never giving up, and the truth that even in the hardest times, help could appear in the most unexpected form. She wanted him to grow knowing that love, courage, and hope could overcome even the most terrifying challenges. Years later, Daniel grew up carrying the memory of the desert, the journey, and the stranger with the hat who had saved them. Maria often recounted the story, teaching him to be strong, compassionate, and brave. She knew that without the stranger's intervention, their lives might have been very different, and she honored that kindness by living fully, loving deeply, and helping others whenever she could. The desert had tested them, but it had also shown them the power of hope, courage, and human kindness. And though the stranger had left quietly, never asking for thanks or recognition, Maria and Daniel carried his presence in their hearts forever. He was a reminder that even in the darkest, most impossible moments, hope could appear when it was needed most. Their lives, once filled with fear and uncertainty, were now full of possibility, safety, and love, a testament to the courage of a mother, the resilience of a child, and the quiet heroism of a stranger with a hat who rode into their lives just in time.